There are growing questions today around a new and deadly outbreak. Scientists determined that this monkeypox virus was engineered. With limited antiviral drugs and no known effective treatments, countries around the world are struggling to control another pandemic with already devastating effects.
We're seeing far fewer cases in countries where governments took early and decisive action.
And some international experts are urging the WHO to adopt a phased approach to warnings.
In March 2021, the Nuclear Threat Initiative conducted a tabletop exercise in partnership with the Munich Security Conference aimed at reducing the risk of high-consequence biological threats. In this fictional scenario, a country named Bernea was attacked on May 15, 2022, by a terrorist group called SPA from neighboring country Arnica, with whom they share a border. This attack spread a weaponized monkeypox virus made more transmissible and resistant to current vaccine technology, ultimately leading to over 3.2 billion people infected with the virus in just over a year. This exercise was co-chaired by Dr. Ernest Moniz, co-chair and CEO of the Nuclear Threat Initiative, and Wolfgang Ischinger, chairman of the Munich Security Conference. Notable participants include the leaders of powerful institutions such as the Wellcome Trust, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, as well as many current and former government officials. Given the folks involved in this exercise, it should concern anyone when you take into consideration the recommendations they made after concluding the exercise. Recommendations made include strengthening global biosurveillance by giving more control to organizations such as the World Health Organization and United Nations. They recommend creating a new international public health alert system headed by the World Health Organization, which would prompt decisions at the national level. They would also like the United Nations to create a new joint assessment mechanism to investigate high-consequence biological events of unknown origin. This would be voted on by member states to give the United Nations sole authority to investigate these potential outbreaks. They would then use advanced biotechnology and bioinformatics tools that would guide public health response in individual nations. It also recommends that national governments take a, quote, no-regrets approach to pandemic response, meaning if there is a chance that an outbreak could turn into a pandemic, they should respond in full measure with lockdowns, mask mandates, and so on, even with the absence of cases or fatalities. Ostensibly, this could mean declaration of lockdowns and totalitarian measures against large populations simply by declaring that there could potentially be a threat, even with no evidence to back that claim. Examples they give as actions to take against these supposed threats include social distancing, masks, and contact tracing. It goes on to compare this exercise with the COVID-19 pandemic and claims it was so disruptive globally only because governments did not implement early, drastic measures. They emphasize a whole-of-government, no-regrets bias toward early action and claim that even if it's a false alarm, the default move should be action because, quote, you will not have the luxury of waiting for certainty. This should trouble any reasonable person, as they are essentially saying that, at any point in time, by simply declaring the possibility of a threat, they have the power to put you and your family in a situation which might damage your health or cause untold economic hardship, all in the name of possibly preventing cases, not even necessarily deaths, from an illness. When you consider that some studies and government officials have indicated that early drastic measures like lockdowns cost lives and had a significant negative impact on physical and mental health, especially for children, such powers seem less about health and more about control. They also advocate for the creation of a new international entity which would be given power to reduce emerging biological risks associated with technological advances which could either be under control of the UN or at least guided by them and the World Health Organization. This is supposedly to prevent bad actors from developing bioweapons using new technologies. With that being said, the WHO is meeting at the 75th World Health Assembly in Geneva, Switzerland from May 22nd to the 28th to discuss a global pandemic treaty which would give the WHO the ability to bypass the sovereignty of all nations involved in the name of public health were it to be approved. There are also conveniently now over 80 cases of monkeypox popping up all over the globe around the same time, and the WHO recently met to discuss this atypical surge in cases. This month we also saw news that the World Health Organization, in cooperation with the G7 health ministers, are running a pandemic simulation where smallpox is spread when a leopard bites a human. They are calling this scenario leopardpox. What is perhaps even stranger is that the monkeypox scenario from last year's Munich Security Conference specifically predicted the beginning of a monkeypox pandemic to begin around last week, mid-May 2022. What's going on here? To start making sense of things, in this video, I am going to document the numerous connections to be made between the key participants of last year's exercise and many nefarious private foundations, non-governmental organizations, as well as international organizations, all of whom have a storied history involving population control, as well as support for agendas which would expand global governance. The Nuclear Threat Initiative was founded in 2001 by former Georgia Senator Sam Nunn and entrepreneur Ted Turner of the Turner Broadcasting System. The same Ted Turner who said this:
We've got to stabilize the population. When I was born, there were
what's wrong with the population? I mean,
with too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff.
But
if there were less people, they'd be using less stuff.
Their stated mission is to develop and implement nuclear security projects and inspire efforts towards nuclear, biological, and chemical threat reduction. It acts as the coordinator for the Nuclear Security Project, formed in 2007, partly by Sam Nunn and notorious war criminal Henry Kissinger. The Munich Security Conference, which partnered with NTI for this exercise, was founded in 1963 by former Nazi soldier Ewald Heinrich von Kleistschmitzen, who was active in the German resistance and also involved in the 1944 assassination attempt of Adolf Hitler. The conference is held every February, and one of the attendees of the first conference was Henry Kissinger. As a senator, one of Nunn's quote-unquote accomplishments was getting the Nunn-Lugar Threat Reduction Act passed. This provided Russia with assistance in destroying their excess nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. This saw former Soviet bioweapons labs converted into US-funded facilities meant to decommission these weapons, but many have since accused them of being secret bioweapons factories. Nunn was previously involved in the smallpox bioattack simulation from 2001 called Dark Winter, in which he played the president during the scenario. His nuclear threat initiative has also partnered with groups like the World Economic Forum and the Wellcome Trust on previous biosecurity innovations and risk reduction programs, such as in 2018 when he convened leading experts in public health to address and reduce the biological risks of new technology. He is also an agenda contributor with his own page on the World Economic Forum website. The World Economic Forum was founded by Klaus Schwab in 1971, who was a student of Henry Kissinger in 1967, where he attended Harvard and has credited him as being one of the greatest influences on his thinking. This is the same man who in a 1975 meeting famously stated, "The illegal we do immediately, the unconstitutional takes a little longer." The Wellcome Trust is led by Jeremy Farrar, also a participant in this recent exercise, and was founded in 1936 as a foundation to fund research into improving human and animal health. It has many ties to the eugenics movement, which was and is a racist program based upon excluding what they deem as inferior people from the gene pool in favor of promoting those deemed superior. Jeremy Farrar is also an agenda contributor with his own page on the World Economic Forum website. He is also a member of the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, or CEPI, which was partly funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as the World Economic Forum and the Wellcome Trust. The CEO of CEPI is a man named Richard Hatchett, who was on the pandemic planning team under George W. Bush. He is also credited as devising the concept of social distancing as a non-pharmaceutical intervention to prevent the spreading of disease, which we have seen heavily enforced during the so-called COVID-19 pandemic. From 2011 to 2016, he served as Deputy Director for the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, commonly known as BARDA, eventually becoming the acting director. This is worth noting because in 2011, BARDA granted a no-bid contract to a company named SIGA Technologies to provide their oral smallpox medication called TPOXX worth $460 million. SIGA Technologies has been granted more contracts with BARDA and other governments since, including more recently, and they stand to profit heavily if there were an outbreak of a pox-like virus. How they obtained this contract initially is questionable, and it's alleged that Ronald Perlman, billionaire mogul and the majority shareholder in the company, longtime Democrat activist, and also a name in Epstein's Little Black Book, used his political connections to secure it. Another participant in this exercise was Dr. George Gao, virologist and director of the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention. He's been involved with previous pandemic simulation exercises, such as Event 201, which was held in October 2019 in partnership with the World Economic Forum, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. This event simulated a coronavirus outbreak 2 months before it allegedly happened in real life. He also conducted research at Harvard Medical School in 1999 as a Wellcome Trust International Traveling Fellow. He is also associated with the Global Virome Project, which was formed in 2016, supposedly in response to the repeated, unpredictable emergence of high-impact viral pandemics. High-level world leaders, scientists, and international organizations gathered at the Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Conference Center to develop this project. Leaked emails by the Washington Post also show Gao had a cozy relationship with Anthony Fauci and EcoHealth Alliance, run by Peter Daszak, which many believe to be a front for the CIA. EcoHealth Alliance is tied to the lab in Wuhan, where many suspect the virus first originated. Dr. Christopher Elias also participated in Event 201, as well as this NTI exercise. He is currently the president of Global Development for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, hired by them in 2012. He is an agenda contributor with his own page on the World Economic Forum website, and in 2005 was recognized as Social Entrepreneur of the Year by the Schwab Foundation, which was started in 1998 by Klaus Schwab and his wife. He worked in a leadership role at the Population Council from 1990 until 2000. This is a nonprofit organization started in 1952 by John D. Rockefeller III and receives funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Another participant of this NTI exercise with heavy ties to the Rockefellers and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation would be Dr. Margaret Hamburg. Like Sam Nunn, she was also involved in the 2001 Dark Winter exercise. She's a former FDA commissioner who was criticized for her speedy approval of drugs and devices at the expense of safety. In 2014, under her leadership, the FDA approved 51 different drugs, which was the most in 20 years. She's also been credited with facilitating the globalization of the agency. She is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which receives heavy funding from the Rockefeller Foundation. She also served on the board of the Rockefeller Foundation and Rockefeller University. She is a current member of the Global Health Security Advisory Committee of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and a member of the Gavi Alliance Board, which was also started by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. While doing all of this, she somehow finds time to be a member of the Strategic Advisory Board on Vaccines and Drug-Resistant Infections for the Wellcome Trust, and is also on the board of directors for the Nuclear Threat Initiative. She was also sued in 2016 by activist Larry Klayman for conspiring with Johnson & Johnson to suppress safety information about the drug Levaquin. Seemingly overqualified in every regard, she served on the Center for Strategic and International Studies in 2020 to help fight, quote, misinformation and help increase, quote, vaccine confidence. She was also part of a discussion with Anthony Fauci in October 2019, hosted by the Milken Institute, called Making Influenza History: The Quest for a Universal Vaccine. In this discussion, they mentioned the desire to, quote, blow up the current medical and vaccine system in order to disrupt and rebuild it to be more efficient. What she said was rather ominous, in my opinion.
You know, the complacency really is real. Reflecting back on when I was in government, not in the last administration, but a few administrations back, and I was starting to develop some public health preparedness programs. And I went to FEMA to talk to them about doing a tabletop exercise with us around preparedness for a biological threat. And we were going to do a flu pandemic-like scenario. And they said, we don't do infectious disease. We do hurricanes, we do floods, earthquakes, all kinds of disasters, but, disease outbreaks? And I persuaded them to participate. And it was a remarkable thing to watch them as events unfolded, realizing just how much this kind of an outbreak would undermine all of the essentials of civic life, how it would undermine their own ability to mobilize and respond to needs, and also the recognition of the economic costs and productivity costs, in addition to the medical concerns, and ultimately the loss of faith of people in government and leadership because of the failure to be able to provide vaccine in a timely way and other things. So, people just still don't think enough about what this really means in our daily lives and what the impacts are, even though every year we're suffering a lot of preventable death, illness, and disability.
Others involved in the 2021 NTI monkeypox exercise were Bernard Arnault, third richest man in the world and chief executive of LVMH, which is a French multinational corporation formed in 1987 that controls 60 subsidiaries which manage 75 big brands. In 2014, he was given the David Rockefeller Award by the Museum of Modern Art for his public works. He was also close friends with Baroness Philippine de Rothschild of the Rothschild banking dynasty. Luc de Bruyne, a strategic advisor for the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness Innovation CEO Richard Hatchett, which was created in 2017 by Bill Gates and the Wellcome Trust. Angela Kane, former World Bank employee and United Nations representative for disarmament affairs. She held many high positions in the United Nations and was also responsible for launching the UN website. She's co-chair of the Regional Council on the Korean Peninsula for the World Economic Forum. Dr. Emily Leproust, CEO of Twist Bioscience and member of Connected DMV in their Pandemic Prevention and Biodefense Initiative, which has received a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for $1 million in 2021. She is also an agenda contributor who has her own page on the World Economic Forum website. John Nagin Song, a Cameroonian virologist and director of the African CDC. He was appointed by Biden to be the Global AIDS Coordinator for the State Department, fighting AIDS in foreign countries, and has also worked for the American CDC and WHO as their chief of virology in 1993, as well as recently being appointed a special envoy to the WHO Director General. He also has his own page on the World Economic Forum website, and in 2020 was given the Global Goalkeeper Award by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In March 2021, he was involved in the launching of Africa COVID Champions, an initiative partly funded by the Rockefeller Foundation to combat quote-unquote COVID misinformation in the African continent using celebrities and other influencers. The Rockefellers also gave $12 million to help the African CDC track and trace COVID-19 cases that same year. Dr. Michael Ryan, Executive Director of the WHO Health Emergencies Program and former employee of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and their attempts to eradicate infectious diseases in Africa. In 2022, he spoke at a panel discussion on vaccine equity hosted by the World Economic Forum, where he said, "What we need to do is to get low levels of disease incidence with maximum vaccination of our populations, so nobody has to die. The issue is, it's the death, it's the hospitalizations, it's the disruption of our social, economic, political systems that cause this tragedy, not the virus." The numerous connections by the participants of this exercise to the likes of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as the Rockefeller Foundation, are very troubling when you start to realize just how involved they are in matters of public health and infectious disease. In fact, Bill Gates is related to the Rockefeller family, being a distant cousin of Nelson Rockefeller, who was the grandson of John D. Rockefeller. His father, Bill Gates Sr., was friends with David and his son David Jr., and served on the board of Planned Parenthood, an organization founded by a racist eugenicist named Margaret Sanger. They advocated the compulsory sterilization of innocent people deemed unfit for reproduction. In fact, to quote Margaret Sanger herself, "We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population." Like the Wellcome Trust, its goal was to supposedly increase the quality of the human race, but it's worth noting that the Wellcome Trust is directly affiliated with the Adelphi Genetics Forum, which was a successor to the Galton Institute, which itself was a part of the Eugenics Education Society. This admission is even published on Adelphi's own website. It would seem that population control was, and is, a key desire for many of these people. Earlier I mentioned how one participant, Dr. Christopher Elias, was a leading member of the Population Council from 1990 until 2000. The Population Council has proposed many ideas to control the population in the United States and abroad, such as covertly filling our water supply with fertility control agents, compulsory abortion and sterilization, encouraging homosexuality, and discouraging private home ownership. Some of these ideas align with the World Economic Forum's now infamous predictions for 2030, where, quote, "you will own nothing and you will be happy." A lot of these same ideas would later be included in the 1972 Rockefeller Commission report on population growth and the American future. The influence on our public health system and the medical field overall by the Rockefeller family cannot be overstated. The United States Public Health Service is comprised of 11 operating agencies, including the National Institutes of Health, CDC, FDA, and HHS. Around the time of the Great Depression, the federal government emphasized that health matters were best handled at the local level and thus left most of the control to local health boards and privately funded agencies. The Rockefeller Foundation was responsible for funding these health boards and private agencies. Between 1914 and 1933, almost $3 million had been provided by the foundation to local health boards, of which there were almost 600 at the time. There was also the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, which was founded in 1901 and was the country's first biomedical institute. A man named Abraham Flexner was hired to work there and did so for 34 years from when the institute first opened. He is most well known for what became the Flexner Report. This report was commissioned by Rockefeller in 1910 and is essentially responsible for the allopathic medicine system we have in place today. It forced the closures of many medical schools and strong-armed them into adopting Rockefeller-prescribed studies, which homogenized the medical system. It influenced how doctors were taught, how much schooling they required, and where they should learn, as well as giving the American Medical Association, another organization heavily funded by the Rockefeller family, oversight of all medical schools in every state. In May 2010, the Rockefeller Foundation released the Scenarios for the Future of Technology in International Development, commonly known as the Lockstep Papers. This is because on page 18 of the document, one of the scenario narratives was titled Lockstep, a world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership, with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. There are many parallels which can be drawn between this fictional scenario and the coronavirus crisis we have been experiencing since 2020. It discussed a fictional 2012 influenza pandemic originating from wild geese. It infected 20% of the global population and killed 8 million in less than a year, destroying economies and global supply chains. In the document, they praised China for their quick and draconian response, quarantining their populations. It also discussed national leaders forcing the wearing of ineffective face masks as well as mandatory body temperature checks when entering most locations. It goes on to say that even after the pandemic was over, the restrictions and authoritative measures stuck and even increased to combat things like environmental crises and terrorism. It said people were willing to trade their sovereignty and privacy for security, allowing biometric IDs for all citizens, as well as more regulation of industry and everyday life. It seems to argue that this is overall a good thing, so long as the world leaders were not irresponsible elites, using the power for their own benefit. However, ultimately this caused growing pushback, and by 2025, most citizens around the world were tired of their lives being constrained by so many tight rules. Are we to believe that this wasn't all planned? Are we to believe that pandemics, engineered or otherwise, won't be pushed as the new normal? How many times are we going to fall for the same old tricks? If what our leaders did during this so-called coronavirus pandemic were any indication of what they have planned for something supposedly more virulent, will we have any civil liberties left at all? We were all forced to stop living our lives, as we had for millennia, and put everything on hold for a disease with a nearly 99% survival rate. In doing so, the infrastructure for an Orwellian biosecurity state has been built around most of the planet. Ultimately, it was people's fear, more than any virus, that allowed this to happen. Will we repeat the same mistakes if the same tactics and same narrative in a slightly different form is used against us again? I think it's time we fought back and stopped allowing these unelected officials, as well as our own elected leaders, to destroy our lives and the futures of our children. Or are we going to sit back and just let it happen?